You are listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast produced by Veteran Strategies and featuring conversations with fascinating and impactful men and women who have shaped our world, our communities, and our history. My name is Robert Vane, Principal of Veteran Strategies, and your host for our discussion. You are listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies, a local veteran public relations enterprise, and sponsored by Girl Scouts of Central Indiana, Garmon Construction, Leaders and Legends LLC, the Grand Hall and Conference Center at Historic Union Station, the McGinley's Golden Ace Inn, and McAllister Machinery, your friendly neighborhood Caterpillar dealer. You may find all your sales and rental equipment needs at McAllister.com. We are pleased to announce our podcast is a member of the All Indiana Podcast Network in partnership with Wish TV. You may find Leaders and Legends at allindianapodcastnetwork.com. Thinking of starting a podcast or need to host a public meeting? Let Leaders and Legends LLC be your partner as you look for new ways to communicate your message. Please contact Chris Spangle or me at leadersandlegends.net. Thank you for joining us on the Leaders and Legends podcast. Our guest today is Todd Huston, Speaker of the Indiana House of Representatives, and flat out one of the nicest people I have ever met in politics. I've known him about 16 years since I started at State Party as comms director, and Speaker Huston was State Party treasurer. We are so incredibly lucky to have him as Speaker in this state. And I hope that is obsequious enough for you, Jim Shella, as you take over the questions. We are joined by political reporter emeritus of Wish TV, Jim Shella. My friend, go ahead. Todd, thank you for coming on.
Well, thanks for the very nice introduction, Robert. I feel the same way about you. So it's a pleasure being your friend. Jim, I don't know what to say about you. We'll reserve that thought until after the questions. So.
Nice to see you again.
Good seeing you. Great seeing you.
And Robert, thanks for having me. Actually, Todd and I used to engage on a regular basis back when he worked for the superintendent of public education. As I recall, we'll probably talk about that a little bit. But I want to start out talking about your family background. I mean, you have an uncle with an interesting history.
Yeah.
Tell me about Tom.
Yeah, Uncle Tom is a very unique person, and a person that I've learned a lot from through the years. You know, I grew up in a family that was politically involved. By the time I could remember, Uncle Tom had done his time in government, and for those that didn't know, Uncle Tom was a conservative leader in the 1960s. Came into the Nixon administration in 1968 when President Nixon was elected. Served there until I believe 71, and then left and came back here to Barton Thornburg. But I learned a ton about life and politics from Uncle Tom, and Uncle Tom's a very conservative man. I always say, and quick to write and opine about when he thinks his nephew's gone askew. So I get honest feedback, but it was great. And
he's something of a historian too.
He's a massive historian. I mean, he's probably as well versed on Indiana politics as anybody. Has long had one of the best private collections of political memorabilia in the country. And has an incredible network of people, and that he's close with, and that I've had an opportunity to meet through and because of him. But the great thing about Uncle Tom is one thing I learned. Before I really even knew people and who people were. I remember, Jim, it goes back to, my first exposure to Ann Delaney was through, your show and, Week in Review. And I remember my father telling me one day, one of Uncle Tom's best friends is Ed Delaney. And
they lived across the street.
They lived right across the street from each other. However far right Uncle Tom is, Ed is as far left. But, you can have relationships with people you disagree with. And I think that was a very important thing for me as a young person to learn, and that, you can disagree, but you can still be friends. You can still be friendly, and you can develop, positive relationships with people.
So. Jim, would you do me a favor? Would you ask Speaker Huston about the text he received on Thanksgiving night from the host of the Leaders and Legends podcast.
Which was, I believe you were reading a book about the Huston plan, which was something Uncle Tom had written. It was funny. I had a college professor one day give me a book, and it was called regarding the Huston plan. So it'll occasionally like pop up from time to time. I hope that shows up in the Google alerts a lot more than anything deals with me. That's
something he wrote for Nixon.
He did. Yeah. He wrote the Huston plan was, I mean, in some ways, like, it depends on your viewpoint of the world. But in some ways, Mary's Law was a Patriot Act of 2001 and 2. But yeah, he did that, and he's just extraordinarily brilliant man. Served on the board for the American Conservative Union for a long time. Just it's funny to interact with people who know Uncle Tom, and have stories to tell.
Well, knowing that, the fact that you've ended up working in politics shouldn't be a surprise to anybody. But you kind of got here through an education path.
Yeah. So, I had a couple of things that were hugely important to me. One, I had a family that was interested in it. My father was an attorney in town and dealt in Republican politics. Another one of my uncle's business partners was Al Hubbard, who and Al's been a hugely influential person in my life. So, I kind of, you were as an expectation. It's funny. I grew up in a family of very smart people. I'm the dumbest one in my family. And I had a learning, disability when I was a kid. So I had to work at it. So when you went to the dinner table, you were expected to contribute and talk about things. And so, watching the news became important. And so I became involved, got out of college and education really matters to me. It mattered to me personally. I saw how it changed my life, and how people in the system changed my life. For me, I love my local community. I graduated from Hale Southeastern Schools. My wife graduated from Hale Southeastern Schools. And so there was an opportunity. Some people asked me to run for school board. I was interested in it. I ran when I was 30. It was one of the greatest experiences of my life. I won't tell you I was a great board member. I will tell you that I thought pretty hard at it, but I had a lot to learn. It's a great place to get experience. And you need I always say when I leave here, I would like to go back to a local school board. I think it'd be a better member. I think that job is critically important. From that, Governor Daniels appointed me to the State Board of Education after he won in 2004, which he's been an incredibly important person in my life too. And then, that same year in 2005, he appointed me treasurer of the State Republican Party where Robert and I met. And then, I became active in kind of state education politics at that point.
And then you went to work for Tony Bennett.
Went to work for Tony. So when Tony was elected, he and Governor Daniels at the time asked me to do that. Told me I'd do it for 1 year, did it for 2. Proud of what we accomplished. I think, we have the largest, school choice program in the country right now. That's because of the leadership that began back then. You look at the education results, they were, we had the highest NAEP scores in the country the preceding years after our reform. So, proud of the work that was done and proud of the friendships that I made.
Well, that position, state school superintendent, has been taken off the ballot. It's now an appointment by the governor. But during that period when you were there, I think in particular, it was very political.
I think the job inherently, Jim, it's always interesting to me because there's some politics in that. There's politics in every form of education. If you're a local school board, you're elected. There are states that elect the superintendent, of individual school districts. I think it was why it felt more political then was because for the first time you had somebody pushing a different agenda that wasn't just about putting more money in the system and those types of things, but saying we're going to value parental school choice. We're going to hold people accountable. And I think, and by the way, I think, one of my dearest friends in the world is Tony. And I would tell you, I was not a great, counselor on that because we wanted to take the world and probably moved a little too quickly, and should have taken a little more time. But But I think, we felt a sense of urgency. Governor Daniels was awesome. He was 110% supportive of that. Speaker Bosma, Senator Long. And, there's a unique time. And I look back and I go, I learned a lot professionally about it. I'm awful proud of the fact that, I think it's set Indiana up well for the coming years preceding it and where we are, after it and where we are today.
So what made you run for state representative?
That's a great question. I always tell, and people always come to you in these positions I had a bunch of people tell me I should run. And that wasn't the case. Because it never is the case. Most of the time when somebody tells me all the people that wanted you to run, I'm like, when they'll call me up and say, I've had a lot of people talk to me. I'm like, so you talk to your wife and your mother, or your husband and your mom or dad.
And the mirror talks to you sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes. But, yeah, exactly. No, through redistricting, they literally drew a seat for Fishers, and it wasn't certainly because of me, and it was kind of interesting to me, and so I began thinking about it, and somebody that's always been important is at that time Governor Daniels. And I asked Governor Daniels what he thought about it. He said, "I can't believe you'd even consider it." With maybe a couple words in between, and he said, but then I said, I think I'm going to do it, but if I do it, the only way I'll do it is if you endorse me. And he was more popular than Santa Claus in my district in May of 2012. So all I had to do was knock on the.
Did he live in that district?
No,
no. At that point,
no. So all he had to do was just knock on, all he had to do was just, all I had to do was knock on somebody's door and say, "Hi, I'm Todd Huston," and give my spiel, and then saying I'm endorsed by Governor Daniels, and that was good enough. And so he he did that. He was great. And
I would imagine he knows your uncle too.
He knows my uncle. He knows my father. Obviously, he knows Hubbard. He knew me. We got to become, close when in the 05 to 08 stuff. And so we had a great working relationship, and so he was great about it, and kind of won the primary, and then ended up here.
Took out an incumbent.
No open seat.
Was it?
I ran against a person that was a locally elected official, but it was an open seat.
Okay. My research was faulty there.
Yeah.
Somewhere
you don't have Jim Hester around anymore to do your research.
Well, there's Ballotpedia, I think, said that Scott Reske held that seat, but
he held probably the number 37. But
right.
During redistricting, sometimes numbers get reshuffled. So he got that seat was with, I think he ran against Bob Cherry. So
he got taken out one way or the other.
Yeah. You said that, Jim. I did.
Well, so you became, I think, speaker in a relatively short amount of time for somebody who serves in the House of Representatives, correct?
Well, you probably have more history than I do. Obviously, in a state where you don't have term limits, it occasionally will take longer. And I just think a series of events took place that allowed me to get to here.
I don't think you could ever break Richard Guthrie's record. Didn't he become speaker in his freshman year?
Yeah.
I only know that because his daughter Jennifer and I graduated from Howe together.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, he talk about another great guy.
Yeah.
Rest in peace, Dick Guthrie. Huh. But I thought he was a freshman and got elected speaker in '66 when that big Republican year.
wave came.
Did you ever have an ambition to be speaker? You're like, let me do this for a few years and then move on to the next thing.
No, and people don't always want to believe this, but my core fundamental belief in life is to be where your feet are, right? So just be really good at what you do. So when I walked in, I wanted to know the budget. That was, I figured if you know the budget, you can, that just gives you the best viewpoint of everything taking place in the legislature. So I asked Speaker Bosma at that time, I said, I want to be on Ways and Means. And I'll tell you, a couple of years ago, probably the nicest thing anybody said about me in the legislature was we were in a meeting, and we have a great fiscal team, and one of the members of the fiscal team said, when Todd got here, it was like we got a third fiscal analyst. I mean, I would go every day up to the Ways and Means office, and there were 4 chairs outside the cubicles of the 2 main, David Dukes and Ben Tooley. And I'd put myself on those 4 chairs, and I'd just go to work. I'd just learn. And that was the first year Tim Brown was the chairman of Ways and Means, and Doc was amazing to me. And I just kind of got after it. And so, I started carrying bills that like no one would want to carry the Department of Revenue bill or, these taxation bills. And by the way, I'm not an accountant, but it was hard stuff. But I'd also realized it's economic development, it has real purpose, real meaning. And I just, one of the things I didn't want to do was get pigeonholed like on a specific issue. It was easy to get pigeonholed on education or something like that. And I just always was trying to figure out, what were those things that would, which I felt like had a major impact in Indiana, and how could I work on those things? And so, I kind of cut my teeth through all the Ways and Means stuff. Unfortunately, in 2018, Doc had a motorcycle accident. Speaker Bosma asked me to co-chair Ways and Means with Doc in 2019, and that was a tremendous experience, one in which I learned a lot. And then obviously Speaker Bosma announced in 2019 that he wasn't going to run for re-elect in our caucus. Voted me in, and that was, that transition was great. Speaker Bosma could not have been better about it, and has been a great sounding board for me.
But, that was unusual in itself.
Yeah.
Essentially, you were speaker in waiting for a year. Yeah.
And, that happens in other states, particularly term-limited states. And it was, the way Speaker Bosma handled it was not awkward at all. I mean, he was great about it. I mean, you obviously have this weird thing where obviously, people would come to me because they knew I'd be here or anticipated me being here for future sessions, and he announced he wasn't going to do it. And it could have been awkward. It wasn't. I mean, we kind of, he would make sure if there was anything long-term that we were engaged really closely together. It actually worked out really, really well. And I thought it was very instructive on how you should really have a transition. We were fortunate. We didn't have I was very fortunate. I look back now, I don't think I knew how fortunate I was. I was voted in unanimously, so we didn't go through, any turmoil or anything like that. And so that transition was one that was so much easier for me, and it became very, very important because I literally got sworn in, and then as a speaker, and then COVID marches right behind it, and it would have been easy to splinter pretty quickly. But we have a great caucus that has always been supportive.
Well, I did the PR for that announcement, for Brian Bosma's announcement, and I could tell you the fact that you were his successor gave him peace of mind that I don't know that he would have had otherwise, in terms of just stepping away, like he did.
But as you guys both know, I mean, Brian had the longest term in history of Indiana speaker, did so much for our state. And, I'm always conscientious. I can only be who I am, right? I can't be anybody but me. And so I never really said I got big shoes to fill, because I can't fill them. But I am so appreciative of what he did for our state, what he did for me. Brian and Cheryl have been great to Denise and I, and I'll always be grateful for that.
You're listening to the Leaders and Legends podcast with Indiana Speaker of the House, Todd Huston, and our frequent co-host, Jim Shella. Jim, do you want to talk about any time that you interviewed Speaker Huston? And
well, I haven't been covering the General Assembly since he became Speaker. My
congratulations.
I can tell you, I think I retired at the end of 2016, which was a pretty good time to get out of the game. I do not regret that, although it's fun to have a finger in things like I'm doing today. But I mean, you took over a supermajority, and Robert and I interviewed Speaker Bosma and talked to him about trying to control a supermajority. It wasn't his favorite thing. I think he said that the optimal caucus size might be 58, so that it's easier to hold people in line.
Now, he said that as ex-speaker. Yeah. So as current speaker, you choose whatever number you want.
70. 70. I'm no dummy. 70.
I'm getting the squint eye from wonderful Aaron about, don't put him in that position.
Well, how do you manage a supermajority?
Well, a couple of things I think that are a little bit advantageous for me is I've known nothing but a supermajority. So, we're Brian, Speaker Bosman went through, was in the minority, majority, 50-50. I mean, he literally saw it all. The first year Indiana went to the supermajority in the House was the year I was elected. So I think for some ways, it's just what I know. And you have to really work at communication. I mean, it's a daily thing. One thing I always want I want people to know about me is I'm going to be accessible. I care. I want our team to be successful. This isn't about me. This is about our team. They win, I lose is always what I've always kind of looked at it. And I just have really tried to focus on that. You can only control what you control, right? And so the people of Indiana are going to send me, or send, 100 people here. Lord willing, I'm one if I run. And so I've got to adjust to that. Now, I always try and be humble too, in the sense of I tell people imagine being in charge of HR for 99 people you didn't hire, not one of whom you can fire. So you have to have expectations. You have to have some expectations. I don't just arbitrarily, this is not a monarchy. And, so you have to really work at relationships. And I that's something I've always tried to work at. I've always tried to be sincere about people. And then, I want, probably the hardest part post-COVID, to be honest with you, or since COVID is it broke a lot of relationships, right? Yeah. And people, the body works best if people have relationships with each other. I have a great working relationship with Senator Bray, with Governor Holcomb, people I love to work with. And Lear Giaquin is an amazing person. I have nothing but the highest regards for. And so if you have those types of relationships, I think you can kind of overcome. They're always going to be, I tell people all the time, on most of you guys know, because you follow it, on most issues, it's bipartisan. There's going to be 6 to 8 to 10 maybe every year where we're going to slug it out. And they're meaningful, substantive things there should be robust debate about. That there should be disagreement. But how do you handle that disagreement? How do you move past it? Really, really matters to the institution. I will say Brian was very, very, very wise in telling me Todd, your number one goal and your number one responsibility is to protect the institution. And I've had days I think I've done a really good job of that. And I think I've had days where I haven't done as good, and I just try and learn from those.
But you've had challenges. Last year, you had a couple of members quit the caucus, correct?
I'm not sure I'd say quit. I would say asked not to come. And look, I think, we have a team and we try to make clear that if you want to be part of the team, you need to meet certain expectations. You ultimately choose whether you want to be part of the team or not by meeting those expectations. And so it presented, I like the people, disagreements, but look, my objective is to keep our team intact and keep our team moving in the same direction. If that's not your objective, then you probably don't need to be part of the team. And I will move forward with that. I think it's important that, there needs to be a wider range of opinions. We have a lot of different opinions in our caucus on a lot of different issues, but at the end of the day, people need to realize that, I believe this is, you're part of a team.
You are listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies, a local veteran public relations enterprise, and sponsored by Girl Scouts of Central Indiana, Garmon Construction, Leaders and Legends LLC, the Grand Hall and Conference Center at Historic Union Station, the McGinley's Golden Ace Inn, and McAllister Machinery, your friendly neighborhood Caterpillar dealer. Our guest today is Indiana Speaker of the House, Todd Huston. Co-host is our friend and frequent co-host, and very grateful for your time, Jim. I don't know if I say that enough, but I love the fact that you join us on these. It just makes it so much more fun.
You're welcome.
Speaker, is there a particular Hoosier leader and or legend you admire most?
I'm going to get myself in trouble on this because he's alive, and I've got a lot of people that I could list on this. And I'll say, the most important who's your legend in my book is Mike Houston, who's my father, who kind of set the path for me, and Joni Houston is amazing. And obviously Uncle Tom, Al. I think the person, like from a Brian, but I think the person that, at my core that I look at is Mitch, and I could go back in history. We've had a ton that mattered, but when my formative, like where my ideas come from, who I would say from a public policy standpoint, from a political standpoint, from, I've said this, that I think, he's one of the few leaders, like in politics, you get rewarded oftentimes for not doing a lot. Some very popular politicians have if you look at it, they really didn't do a whole lot. But I appreciate that a lot of people just want stability and they don't rock the boat. Disruption. It is a very rare thing when somebody is disruptive, as Mitch Daniel was, but as popular as Mitch. And I will never reach. I'm clearly making no progress towards ever being that popular. But I just admire that, because I think, it's so easy. You can get rewarded in these positions for standing still. But like in today's world, you just can't. And
you and I were both at state party one way or the other in 2006, where the Republicans got a pretty significant bloody nose on more than one level. Yeah. I remember Murray going, do I have to talk to Shella? All he's going to do is ask questions about how much we're going to get beat by. Yeah. And it wasn't a particularly good year for us. But to the governor's credit, Governor Daniels' credit, he didn't stop.
No.
He said, that's the risk we take.
That's the risk we take. We can, I tell people this all the time. I was with a group of speakers recently, and they were from from Utah, Texas, Florida, Tennessee, and Arizona. And I said, I love y'all. You're great people. But we don't have mountains. We don't have warm winters. I wake up every day. We have to compete. And we just have to be better than anybody else. And that means we're going to be that means like as a state, we have to be uncomfortable, but we have to be better. Like we're the fastest growing state in the Midwest. We're attracting, we have inbound migration. It's got to be better. We got to grow. We got to grow faster. We got to make ourselves more attractive to other people. We have to drive economic development. We can't do it by saying we're going to hang a shingle out and say it's 75 degrees during the winter, or that you can go skiing in the winter. No offense to my friend Chip, perfect and perfect North, but Senator perfect, but so we have to compete.
If I could, yeah. I was once in a gathering of visiting urban planners from China who were in the 25th floor in the city county building, getting a presentation, and the person giving the presentation told them, "Look out the window, look to the horizon, and tell me what you see." And nobody had an answer. And so he asked it again. He said, look to the horizon. Tell me what you see. And nobody had an answer. He said, that's right. Nothing. Indianapolis is the largest city in the world without a natural border. There's no river, no lake, no ocean, no mountains, as you said.
Yeah. We just, but the opportunity is so awesome. Like, and I look across the entire state. Like, I'm thrilled about what's taking place in Southeast Indiana, the growth in Southeast Indiana. I'm super excited about East Central Indiana. I think between what's happening in Columbus, what's going to happen in Indianapolis, you're going to see real substantive growth. You're seeing already growth in really important ways in Northeast Indiana around Fort Wayne. They set a goal that said they want to raise population growth. They're actually doing it, right?
Lebanon, what's happening in Lebanon?
Well, what we're doing in what we're doing in Lebanon, what we're doing, and I really believe you won't in less than 2 decades, you won't even know when you left Indianapolis when you got to Lafayette, and it's not going to be traditional, Indiana industries, right? It's going to be new, and it's going to be exciting things, and I can walk across the state and go, I really feel now we've got a lot of opportunities and a lot of challenges that we got to get better at, and that's why we can't stand still, but like. We have a great thing to sell. We've had terrific leadership, good, strong, conservative Republican leadership. I mean, it started with Mitch and with Vice President Pence, now with Governor Holcomb. With legislative leaders, we're in a great financial position. We can make investments in things that matter, and we will. But again, we can never be satisfied because we're not the place that can just stand on its laurels. We're not the place and go, well, we're going to stop for 5 years, because I think we can point to states that have stopped and they're feeling the pain of that.
as both chairman of Ways and Means in the Indiana House, or co-chairman, I should say, and speaker, you get to say yes a lot, and you get to say no a lot. Which one do you enjoy more?
Well, everybody ran for these offices like to say yes, but my favorite story is I'm talking to my mother when I'm chairing Ways and Means. My parents don't understand why I'm doing this. So they love me and I love them beyond words.
Did you say blame the dinner table?
Yeah, I blame the dinner table, but they don't understand it. I love them. But my mom, like, you know, we're having this conversation with my mom, and like she believes what 99% of politics. But, you know, people in the general public, like, we just sit there and say yes to everything. And I said to my mother, I go, you know, and this is why I was doing Ways and Means. I said, you know, literally, I don't know. I don't know the exact ratio, but it's probably 15-1. Yes, no to yes. Right. Mm-hmm. And so, like, you learn to say no in a lot of nice, pleasant. I always tried to say no in a nice, pleasant, but direct way. Right. You know, like,
maybe next year.
Maybe next year. Well, like, my favorite is I would call people, like, when the House passes its budget first. This is a great, Luke Kenley gave me this a bit of advice. He said, Todd, you know, call people and tell them before the budget comes out, because then they at least know. You're not surprising them. So I was making those phone calls. And I mean, and I would say things like, you know, but look, it's the House budget. If you can convince Senator Mishler's, you know, you learn to say no in a variety of different ways, but it's funner to say yes. It's funner to see, like, positive things. But my responsibility, whether in that position or this is to say no. Like, you know, I mean, I say no a lot more than I say yes, because one, you have finite resources. Two, I have a finite role, my viewpoint of role of government and those types of things. So, like, people always want you to come in and say yes. And, you know, for me, a lot of times I got to be the guy that says, no, I don't think that's what we as caucus want to do.
Think about whether it's money or an issue or whatever. The last time tell us about the last time you changed your mind on something where you were like, you know, 10 years ago I thought X and now I think 1 over X. Because we all go through it in, you know, the political world.
There have been a couple, there have been a lot of things. And I think the greatest thing I love about this position is you get to talk to a whole bunch of smart people and they challenge your thinking. And if you aren't prepared to have your mind changed, I don't think you're doing yourself any intellectual. You're not being intellectually honest. Like, you have to also note all your hypocrisies and all this. But so my favorite, the one that makes me look like the worst, is in 2019, you know, Governor Pence had a big initiative around regional cities.
Right.
And let's just say I wasn't a super big fan. And so Governor Pence does all the regional city stuff. And so in 2019, I zeroed out the line item. There was some money left. I zeroed out. We had no regional cities program anymore. Again, great thing about being in this role. In 2019, I started to kind of visit around the state at different events and stuff like that.
And in 19, for the session,
I zero it out.
Right, but were you speaker in 19 for the session?
I was.
That's what I thought.
Ways and Means. I was author of the state budget. So, but beginning in 18 and then 19, I start doing kind of the statewide thing that you have to do in this position. And I kind of realized in 19 and 20, I probably was a little bit, quick to judgment on the programs. I went to the 3 areas of the state that won: Northeast Indiana, North Central Indiana, Southwest Indiana. So, after doing this, and, you know, there were some news articles written about the end of regional cities, yada, yada, yada. In 2021, we're Senator Bray and I are meeting with Governor Holcomb, and I said, you know, we're talking about the House budget, and I said, you know, I want to let you guys know, we're allocating dollars that will be used for what is now the READY program. I said, you know, kind of regional cities 2.0. And I thought Governor Holcomb was, you know, going to drop his coffee all over his lap. And I said, look, I get it. But you got to admit when you're wrong. And I would have to admit that I was wrong. And we invested $500,000 this past budget, in the 2021 budget. We'll invest another $500 million in 2023 budget. Goes into qualities of life, connects communities. And I think it was a great, I try to learn every day. Like sometimes I don't like what I learn because it doesn't reinforce what I wanted to believe, but it's important that you learn every day. And that was one where like is a major policy thing where I did a complete flip flop, right? From being totally against it was roughly $138 million package in 2015 to being the guy that's, putting $1 billion towards it in 2021 and 2023.
You mentioned Governor Holcomb a few minutes ago. He and I are almost the exact same age. I'll be 55 actually tomorrow, and he'll be 55, I think, in May. How old are you, sir?
50.
And so leads me right to the question of generations. You talked about your dad, your uncle, Mitch Daniels, looking at that generation, Al Hubbard,
yeah.
And you can name Fred Klipsch. The list goes on and on, right? And so you're the leader of kind of your generation, you and the governor, right? Because you're close in age. What do you think is your responsibility, not only to the people, the Gen Xers like us, but to the people, the younger folks who are just now starting to serve 2 or 3 terms in the House and be involved in politics? I've always say this all the time. If you want to cure a lot of this hostility that exists between partisans, make them work together more.
Amen.
Work the polls. Do things like that where you see each other and you realize they've got a point of view, but they're not necessarily evil. How do you do all that, especially to mentor the younger folks coming up?
Well, you just used the word I would talk about. I talked about it yesterday with the group is mentoring. Like I was mentored. I was mentored by all those people you just mentioned in deeply significant ways. I learned from each of them, Mitch, Tony, Al, everyone in my family. And I could go, I literally said to somebody yesterday, I said, I couldn't even I've had such an extraordinary amount of people that have poured something deep and meaningful in my life. I couldn't put it on 50 pages of a book. That's how blessed I am. I have to return that. I have to return that. So how do you mentor people? It begins with relationship, Robert, just as you noted. And I've never hated somebody I knew. And I always try and remember, somebody's got a mom, a dad, a sister, a brother, a husband, a wife, a son or daughter who loves them. So there's some redeeming factor in every single person. It's up to me to go find it, And so I try to model the behaviors I hope. I try to treat my colleagues with deep respect. I try to treat, the people in the administration, the people I meet, obviously on our staff. I think we have a great opportunity in politics to mentor young people. Most of our staff is young. I want them to look and say, look, he has friends on both sides of the aisle. He cares about people. I think so much of that stuff, I find that where the hostility is in people that don't actually participate in the process.
Right, that's exactly right.
And I'm like, come join us. And if you don't get if you don't get challenged by something every day that make you have to think about somebody else's perspective, then I don't want to live that life. Now it doesn't mean I'm going to change. I have a very strong core. I'm a very conservative person. I'm not going to sit there and deny that but I care passionately about people. I said this in my org day speech that, I get frustrated because everybody looks like people come to me and how government is going to solve this problem? How is government going to solve? People solve other people's problems, right? We have to lift each other up. And I want to lift the person. We're working, Denise and I have a tremendous new young person in our life that we've gotten engaged with, who's faced challenges and I'll never, ever, ever understand. But, she's telling me she met Tom McDermott at a rally. Mm-hmm. And she's kind of talking about meeting Tom and she begins to kind of be apologetic. I go, hey, it's okay. You're a Democrat. We're still going to love you one way or the other. It's okay. It's like, to
that point, and then I want to turn it back over to Jim before you get the final 5 questions in our remaining minutes with Indiana Speaker Todd Huston. 2 questions. One, John Gregg really kind of personifies a lot of what you discussed. He came on the podcast with Jim and I. A, have you talked to him much? Did you learn anything? And then B, who has a better Hoosier accent, you or John Gray?
Well, John, you can at least say where the part of the state John is from. I don't know where mine came from. Look, John was one of the very first people after it was announced I was going to succeed Speaker Boston to reach out to me. We had coffee. He basically said he reinforced a lot of stuff what Brian and Paul Manweiler and Mike Phillips and all these people said, and Pat about you have an obligation to protect the institution, get to know people. And you have a broader responsibility than just being the head of your caucus. You're the head of the House chamber. And I will tell you, I'm not sure when I definitely say I was not, fully appreciative of that. And John saying it, Brian saying it was very helpful, but it prepared me. But then, once you get in, it's still different.
Well, let me ask a question, and Jim, you would know this too as well. So what does that mean? Define protect the institution.
For me, it's like, what's decorum like? What do we do to make sure that there's debate, it's respectful to debate, that the members have an opportunity, one, to have their voice be heard, that they're treated with kindness and respect, that what happens in that chamber, I just try and remind, it is weirdly stressful. I won't lie to you, to stand up that front of that room, because you take on the entire responsibility. If something falls off the rails, everybody else, the people involved, it may be like a blip in time. You get to pick up the pieces for a period of time. And, so you have tremendous, you have tremendous responsibility to make sure. I was, on such an extraordinarily complicated and difficult and very personal subject as what we went through this summer. I couldn't have been more pleased with both the debate by both parties in the House on the debate, and because it was substantive, it was real, it wasn't personal, and while some were elated with the outcome, some were very disappointed with the outcome, I felt like we did the institution well, Robert, and I think that's the thing. Like, I look at the decorum that's taking place in Washington D.C. or even what I see in other states, and I don't want it to be that way. I want Ed Delaney's voice to be heard. I want Matt Pierce's voice to be heard. I want Cherish Pryor's voice to be heard just as much as I want Matt Lehman and Greg Sturwald and Wendy McNamara's voice to be heard. I think that's so important, because once we lose that ability, then, that's when I think, I'm not the democracy's unraveling guy. I think if you know history, you go through, I know you love history like I love history, but I do think that's when you get into trouble, is when you lose the basic tenets of the importance of respect for the institution, respect for each other. Then I think it's awful hard to put that genie back in the bottle.
Let me just, for viewers or listeners, help out a little. Over the years, we've seen things done that damage the institution, or a lack of public testimony on issues, putting proposals out late in the session with no public discussion, limiting floor debate. I mean, they're keeping bills from reaching the floor. Leadership has accomplished on occasion. I mean, a lot of this is in the eye of the beholder.
100%. Oh, 100%, Jim. Like their criticism, you didn't let a bill get to the floor. Well, yeah, that's right. There may have been a variety of different reasons on why that bill didn't get to the floor, and I respect that. And I do think that's in the eye of the beholder. I do think that there's been a good, strong tradition in this chamber and in both chambers about there are days we have hiccups like everybody else, and I've had mine. But for me, I just want to make sure that, when whoever succeeds me goes, he may have screwed up a lot of things, but when we get out on the House floor, things are done in a professional manner.
Have you ever said, because this is so not your personality, I'm the speaker, and this is how we're doing it? Because eventually someone has to be the president, the governor, the 4-star general.
Yeah, I think probably more than people would expect, but that goes with the responsibilities. I mean, you have this awesome institution, this wonderful way we're set up, but at the end of the day, ultimately I was elected by my colleagues to get us to a certain spot, and I have to lead, I have to make sure I'm leading them to that spot, and I'm going to tell them what I think is the best way to get there. And so, yeah, I mean, those are, I can't do it very often. Mm-hmm. I want to respect that, this is not a monarchy. And, but there are days where, we'll have conversations and, we'll get to an outcome. So
how long are you going to do this?
I don't know. I don't, like I said earlier, I just kind of where my feet are is what I love most of the job, in the sense I love the people. I love both the people on our caucus, our staff, the members on both chambers and on both parties, all the different people you get to meet with. So like, I'm the worst career planner of all time.
I remember you saying you weren't going to work for Tony Bennett.
I mean, terrible about this.
Then
stuff.
You try to recruit me to go work for Tony Bennett.
Absolutely. And those are the things that so I just have never really worried about. I always figured God will put me where I can, where I need to be at that point. And I will say probably part of growing up around this is I don't love like people that ooze ambition. Because I'm like, be really good at who you are. I don't care what you do in your life. Be really good at what you do. And if you do that, other opportunities may work for you, open up for you. But like, this is such an awesome job. I get a chance to deal with awesome people. Hopefully I have good things. Hopefully I do good things that impact people across our state. What a blessing it is. I try and remind myself, even on days when it isn't always perfect, what a blessing it is.
You said that you've only really been in the Indiana House during the supermajority days, which I think the first one was 2010. After
2012. It was my election in 2012.
2012 was the first one. Yeah. So let me ask Jim Shella. You've covered Democrat majorities, Republican majorities, ties, and Republican supermajorities. Which did you in the Indiana House? Because the Indiana Senate's been Republican since the ooze. Which one did you enjoy?
Oh, ties.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if you want news, the 50-50, I mean, that's, when I explain to people what my job entailed at times, Organization Day is always on a Tuesday. I think it starts about 10 in the morning generally, right? The first 50-50 in 88, the House gavelled in at 10 in the morning on Tuesday, and it gavelled out sometime in the morning on Thursday. Yeah. It took that long to come up with a power sharing agreement. And I got home for a little while. I got a couple of naps in the middle there, but you got to be here covering it. Yeah. And then you had battles for 2 years after that.
Yeah.
Did you enjoy covering? Because that's when I really first started being interviewed by you.
For what it's worth, the public understands power battles. They don't understand all the policy matters.
Right.
That's right.
Right. Did you enjoy covering? Because this is when I first met Speaker Huston and started being interviewed by you more often than not. The Daniels, Bosma, Bauer triangle in that 2006,
Sure.
2007, 8.
Sure. You talked about what happened in 2006, and shortly after that, Mitch Daniels held that news conference where he said that the Democrats had car bombed his agenda, and then had to turn around and apologize for his choice of words. I mean,
Did he apologize?
He did.
Yeah,
he did. He may not have been terribly good at selling it, but that was true conflict.
Yeah.
And
But it was to what Todd said earlier. You got to innovate. You got to be bold. You got to take chances. That sort of thing. And famously, Pat Bauer said to some Mitch Daniels agenda item, I don't remember what it was, but we've never done it that way before.
Yeah.
Right.
I think, I do think like personalities matter, and I want to be fair to this, between the Governor Daniels and Pat and Brian, you had unique personalities. I mean, Brian is an extraordinarily smart and quick-witted guy, and Pat was a character in and of itself, right?
Super fighter, just an old-fashioned Democrat street fighter.
Yeah, absolutely. And
but lovable in his own way.
Right, great admiration. And then, Governor Daniels is brilliant as anybody and quick-witted himself. And like, you had real personalities. And like, it's funny, I said this to somebody this morning, like, that is not, I hope I'm not some stiff, but like, I don't wake up in the morning. Like, I don't desire, if I'm never on the front page of the newspaper again, the rest of my life, I'd be the happiest soul on earth. Like, I don't try to make headlines. I try to deliver results. Right. And I think, that's, that kind of makes somebody like me boring, right? We're kind of good content. We're always good content for the news media because we do things that make things interesting.
Keep bringing up CRT.
Yeah. I mean, those types of things are always going to be, you have those issues, but I mean, I do think you had a case where, different personalities and again, like, I always chuckle because, like, and I understand why it happens, but right now the news media loves to find spaces in which, we are at odds with the administration and
the Holcomb administration.
Yeah. And I got to tell you, like, I love Eric Holcomb. Like, no apologies. Eric Holcomb is a wonderful person, wonderful guy. We've had a very small number of disagreements, and I just respect what he does for the state, his heart, his commitment, and those types of things. So, like, I'm always like, but I understand they need to create that story, and they need to find those places where there's differences.
Well, because
same thing with our relationship with Rod.
Your conflict, Speaker, your conflict with the governor replaces the conflict of Pat Bauer.
Yeah, right.
And
100%. Right. I mean, I understand completely why they do it. And there are days like, Governor Holcomb and I have joked about this. Like, I mean, we have we always have had a great working relationship. And I have a tremendous amount of admiration for Eric since you and I began to know Eric when he was working for Mitch. Mm-hmm. And so it's just like kind of funny to see that. Like, to go in, like, I'll have people, even like people in general public will be like, their friends might like, what's your relationship with like Governor Holcomb? Like, is he a bad guy? I'm like, Eric Holcomb's like one of the best people on earth you're going to meet. Like, no way.
He just won by 30 points almost.
Absolutely. The same thing. Like, so I think people want to personalize stuff so much in this world. And I think, I try not to, there's a lot more friendships than there are, I hope very few enemies.
So the Jim Shellas of the world, the creators of these problems and frictions, why can't we all get along?
No, they need content. Like, I always say this to people, like, they need content. I don't read one thing that people, I intentionally, and Aaron knows this, our press secretary, I don't read anything that has my name in it. I don't watch any news. Because like, I know I'm a human being that I don't watch the news that involves us, that I will respond to it, right? If people are critical of me, I will want to change to adapt to somebody else. I also know if somebody writes something, which I'm sure never happens, nice about me, I think how great I would be. And I think, for me, personally, I've always just tried to, put my trust in those people around. I got a great group of friends, a great group of family who will tell me I'm a moron when I need to be here. I'm a moron or I'm doing something stupid. But I also recognize, like, look, I read the stories at the national level about conflict too. They have a job to do. I don't begrudge that of them. And, they need to figure out what people are interested in reading.
Tension and conflict are part of the process.
Sure.
And they're good for it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I think that's the thing that, we have disagreements within, obviously within the House or in the Senate and within the administration. That's good. I mean, if we all thought the same, I'd be scared to see what the world looked like.
We have reached the point in the Leaders and Legends podcast where we ask the same 5 questions of all of our guests. Speaker Huston, are you ready?
Yes, sir.
What was your first job?
I worked at the Carmel Putt-Putt. And it was on Carmel Drive. If not for the fact that the Horsfield family sold it, I think I'd still be there.
That's the first putt-putt job, I think, that we've encountered. Number 2.
Followed quickly by Arby's, which was...
and you're 2 for 2, though.
Yeah.
What was your first concert? That you actually bought your own ticket?
I bought my own ticket. Probably Guns N' Roses in 1991.
That's pretty strong. We had several people from overseas, historians, say that was their first podcast, or their first concert. Number 3, if you could suggest any book for someone to read, which book would you choose?
Well, I mean, my faith tells me I read the Bible every night.
If you could witness any event in history, be there in person as it happens, which event would you choose?
I would be there in person.
Be there in person.
Well, it's Christmas season, the birth of Christ.
I was going to say Sermon on the Mount has been up.
Yeah, that would be
popular one.
It would be a popular one.
Last question. If you could have dinner with anyone living today, 2 hours off the record, talk about anything you want, whom would you choose?
Ironically, I bet you I could do this, but I'm not sure you tell me Dan Coates. Can I tell you why?
He's a former podcast guest and absolutely the best of the best.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
One is that I always think, I try not to have a small view of the world. I always say you need big worldview guys. I think the what's going on internationally and what's happening in the international space right now is beyond fascinating. And I couldn't imagine having as much access to information as Director Coates had, how fascinating that would be.
Director of National Intelligence.
Yeah. And so, and obviously Dan's done 100 other important things in his life. But, I always think I would love, sit down with somebody like that or a CIA director and just kind of understand what's going on in the world. Because I think, somebody pretty big reader of history and current events and those types of things. I just think that would be.
He'd have some fun Donald Trump insights.
He would have. I would think that would be awesome stories. And I almost, that would be that would be worth the price of admission in and of itself, Jim.
Well, he came on the podcast and we talked about his career.
Yeah.
He's the first political person I ever worked for, hired by Devin Anderson and Brose McVeigh back in 1992. Yeah. He came on the podcast, talked about his life, basically up till the time he decided to run for Senate again in 2010. He let me know last month that he's going to come on again.
Awesome.
And talk about the second part that we missed, where he worked in the Trump administration and various other things. You have been listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies, a local veteran public relations enterprise, and sponsored by Girl Scouts of Central Indiana, Garmon Construction, Leaders and Legends LLC, the Grand Hall and Conference Center at Historic Union Station, the McGinley's Golden Ace Inn, and McAllister Machinery, your friendly neighborhood Caterpillar dealer. Our guest today has been Indiana Speaker of the House, Todd Huston, who I can say, without reservation, has not changed one tiny morsel from when I first met him nearly 16 years ago. He is just as kind, just as dedicated, and just as self-effacing as he was then. Speaker Huston, thank you very much for coming on the podcast. Jim Shella, thank you as always for joining us. You make all these discussions so much better.
Thank you. Great to be here. Great to see you.
Thank you very much for listening to Leaders and Legends, brought to you by Veteran Strategies Incorporated. If you want to contact us about this program or our menu of public relations services, please send us an email at robert@veteranstrategies.com. That's robert@veteranstrategies.com.